Hello, everyone. Welcome to Celsius 233, your go-to place for fiction book summaries. Today, we will turn the pages of Maria by Mary Wollstonecraft. Maria, or The Wrongs of Woman, is an unfinished novel by Mary Wollstonecraft, first published in 1798. As an influential figure in feminist literature, Wollstonecraft uses this novel to explore themes of gender inequality, emotional repression, and personal freedom. Set in a patriarchal society, the story follows Maria, a woman confined to an asylum by her husband, as she reflects on the wrongs endured by women in her society. The novel expands on themes presented in Wollstonecraft's earlier work, a vindication of the rights of woman. Plot summary: Maria sat alone in the cold, dark confines of her cell, her mind racing between memories of her past and the pressing reality of her present. The asylum's thick stone walls seemed to swallow her thoughts, suffocating her spirit. She was imprisoned not for madness, but for defying her husband, George Venables, whose cruelty knew no bounds. Despair was Maria's only constant companion, except for the occasional visits from Jemima, a servant hardened by life's harshest trials. Jemima, though distant at first, began to soften towards Maria. Her life, shaped by poverty and abuse, had taught her to mistrust everyone. As the two women conversed in the quiet hours of the day, Maria learned Jemima's tragic story, one filled with neglect and mistreatment since childhood. Jemima had suffered greatly, abandoned by her father and forced into labor, where she was treated more like a beast than a person. Despite their different upbringings, both women shared an understanding of suffering, and Jemima began to see Maria as a kindred spirit. Maria's own story was one of gradual disillusionment. Once a hopeful young woman, she had entered her marriage with George, believing love might flourish. However, George quickly revealed his true nature. He was a gambler, a womanizer, and a man consumed by his own desires. To him, Maria was nothing more than a possession. Her opinions, her dreams, her very being were dismissed. Any attempt she made to resist his control was met with anger, and soon, he sought to rid himself of her entirely. Using his power, George had Maria declared insane, locking her away in the asylum, far from the world she once knew. Days blurred into weeks in the asylum. Jemima brought Maria books which offered her a brief escape from the stifling reality. But soon, something more than words on a page caught Maria's attention. Among the books, Maria found notes, small, scribbled messages left by someone who shared her fate. These notes, filled with empathy and shared pain, came from Henry Darnford, a fellow prisoner. He had been confined like Maria, though the reasons for his imprisonment remained unclear. Through these notes, a bond began to form between Maria and Darnford. Their exchanges became more frequent, more personal, and soon, Maria found herself thinking of him often. She could feel the stirrings of hope, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. She longed to meet him, to speak to the man whose words had kindled a spark in her darkened world. At last, the day came. Jemima, who had grown more sympathetic toward Maria, arranged for Darnford to visit her in secret. When he entered the room, Maria felt a rush of emotion. Here was the man who had written those thoughtful notes, who had understood her pain. Darnford, like Maria, had been unjustly confined, taken from his life and trapped in this house of despair. He had once been a man of wealth and privilege, but after falling into debt and making enemies, he had been betrayed and cast into the asylum. Their first conversation was tentative, but as the days passed and they met more often, their connection deepened. They spoke not just of their captivity, but of the world beyond the walls, of freedom, of love, of what might still be possible. In Darnford, Maria saw a man who was capable of understanding her, something George had never been. Slowly, she realized she had fallen in love with him, and she believed that together, they might find a way out. As Maria and Darnford's relationship blossomed, Jemima remained a quiet observer. She, too, had felt the sting of oppression all her life, though her circumstances were different. Jemima shared more of her own story with Maria, of being born into poverty, of being used and discarded by the men in her life, and of the brutal existence she had endured. Despite everything, Jemima had survived, and Maria's kindness rekindled a small flame of hope in her hardened heart. She began to see a way forward, not just for Maria and Darnford, but for herself as well. One evening, as Maria and Darnford spoke in hushed tones, they began to plot their escape. The asylum was heavily guarded, but Jemima, now a trusted confidant, agreed to help. She knew the routines of the guards, the hidden passageways that might offer a way out. Though the plan was dangerous, Maria felt she had no choice. She could not remain trapped in this place, doomed to rot in the shadows of her husband's cruelty. But just as their plan began to take shape, Maria received devastating news. Her infant daughter, taken from her when she was imprisoned, had died. The grief was overwhelming. Maria had clung to the hope that one day she might hold her child again, that they might escape together. Now that dream was shattered. Darnford comforted her as best he could, but Maria's sorrow ran deep. Even so, her resolve hardened. She would escape, not just for herself, but for the memory of her daughter. The night of their planned escape arrived. Jemima had bribed the necessary guards and arranged for a carriage to take them far from the asylum. Maria and Darnford moved cautiously through the corridors, their hearts pounding with the fear of discovery. Jemima led them through a narrow passageway, the flickering light of her lantern guiding the way. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound of footsteps, sent shivers down their spines. As they neared the final gate, their path was suddenly blocked. The head guard, alerted by one of the asylum's doctors, stood in their way. Darnford stepped forward, ready to fight for their freedom, but Jemima intervened. She had one last card to play. Using all the money she had saved from years of servitude, she bribed the guard, offering him a sum too large to refuse. With a nod, the guard stepped aside, and the gate creaked open. Maria, Darnford, and Jemima stepped out into the cool night air, free at last. But the world they stepped into was uncertain, and the road ahead was fraught with danger. Still, Maria felt a glimmer of hope. She was no longer alone, and for the first time in a long while, the future seemed possible. That's it for now, but don't stop here. Mary Wollstonecraft has more stories waiting for you. Check them out in the description or on Celsius 233. Remember, while our summaries capture the essence, they can never replace the full experience of reading the book. If this summary intrigued you, consider diving into the complete story, buy the book, and immerse yourself in Mary Wollstonecraft's original work. Bye-bye, take care, have fun.